Picture this. You're standing in front of a mirror, not to check your reflection, but to ask a question no one else can answer for you. Am I truly living my life, or just playing a role someone else wrote for me? That quiet discomfort you feel in your chest, that's not anxiety. That's your inner self calling out from beneath years of noise, roles, and responsibilities. Carl Jung believed that when you ignore that voice, you don't just betray yourself, you exile your soul from its own home. This isn't about being selfish, it's about survival. Viktor Frankl, in his study of meaning through logotherapy, found that people who couldn't align with their internal values were more likely to fall into despair, even in the most privileged of conditions. Meaning, he said, cannot be handed to you by society. It must be authored from within. And psychology agrees. Daniel Kahneman's theory of the experiencing self versus the remembering self shows that we often construct a life story to satisfy memory and ego, but forget to serve the self who actually feels life moment to moment. That gap between how we live and how we wish we lived, that's where anxiety and depression take root. By the end of this video, we're going to uncover what happens when you stop abandoning yourself, when you walk away from expectations and finally listen to the whisper you've been taught to silence. Not with self-help cliches, but through a journey backed by neuroscience, Jungian psychology, and tools so powerful they rewire your brain at the root. Choosing yourself doesn't mean losing others, it means finally finding you. Let's begin. Hearing the whisper beneath the noise. Most people don't hear their inner voice because it's not loud. It's buried under layers of programming, conditioning, and cultural noise. But neuroscience has confirmed what mystics and philosophers knew long ago. Your body whispers the truth before your mind understands it. Psychiatrist Steve Peters, in his book, The Silent Guides, explains how early life experiences, especially pre-verbal memories, form subconscious scripts that control adult decisions. You're not just reacting to today, you're reacting to a memory your adult brain can't even access consciously. Albert Bandura's work on self-efficacy revealed that when we ignore or distrust that inner signal, we gradually lose our ability to influence our environment. It's not that we lack motivation, it's that we've been trained not to listen to ourselves, and neuroscience backs it up. Antonio Damasio's somatic marker hypothesis shows that emotional signals in the body, heart rate, gut sensations, muscle tension, precede conscious awareness. Your intuition, it's biological fact. When you ignore those signals, your prefrontal cortex is forced to overcompensate, trying to clean up messes triggered by the amygdala and basal ganglia, ancient parts of the brain acting on patterns from your childhood. You become the janitor of your own impulses instead of the architect of your choices. A powerful lesser-known book, The Body Remembers by Babette Rothschild, illustrates how the body stores emotional truth even when the mind forgets. Ignoring that truth is what leads to burnout, anxiety, and decision paralysis. So the next time you feel something off before you can name it, that's not weakness. That's your inner compass. Listen closely, because before you can choose yourself, you have to hear yourself first. Shadow Work 101, The Science of Disowned Selves. Let's talk about the parts of yourself you were taught to hate, hide, or deny. The rage, the jealousy, the neediness, the hunger for recognition. Carl Jung called this the shadow, not evil, but exiled. And it's usually the part of you that holds your deepest power, resilience, creativity, even courage. They often live in the parts you've disowned. Psychologist George Bonanno, in The End of Trauma, found that people who move through adversity successfully don't do so by avoiding emotion. They do it by allowing even the darkest feelings to have a seat at the table. Melanie Klein's theory of object relations adds that as children, we split ourselves into good and bad fragments to stay safe. But as adults, integration is healing. In a groundbreaking 2024 fMRI study led by Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, participants engaged in structured shadow confrontation exercises. Within just 30 days, their amygdala, the brain's fear center, showed reduced reactivity to emotional triggers. Translation: facing your inner darkness rewires your brain to stop flinching. Jung wasn't being poetic, he was being precise. You can't become whole if half of you is locked in the basement. The lesser-known but powerful book, Meeting the Shadow by Connie Zweig, offers practical tools to identify and reclaim the parts of you you've rejected. When you choose yourself, you're not choosing the perfect version, you're choosing all of you, and that's where real freedom begins. Conditioning versus choice. Who's driving the bus? Most of what you call choice isn't actually yours. It's programming. Neuroscientist Hannah Critchlow, in her book The Science of Fate, explains how our genes and environment unconsciously direct behavior. You react before you reflect. You obey without knowing who gave the command. It's not because you're weak. It's because the human brain runs on efficiency, not freedom. But here's the breakthrough. Wilhelm Wundt's early reaction time experiments proved something crucial. Even a microsecond of awareness expands your control over impulse. Insert B.F. Skinner's behaviorism. He said we're products of our environment. But modern neuroplasticity research disagrees. Michael Merzenich brain mapping studies show that with conscious rehearsal, we can rewrite those very patterns. Your habits are neural grooves, but grooves can be smoothed, reshaped, even redirected. You are not stuck. The lesser-known book, Hardwiring Happiness by Rick Hanson, reveals how small, repeated choices, like savoring a good moment for just 10 seconds, can literally change your emotional baseline. So here's a challenge. Identify one micro-habit today that reflects someone else's expectation and stop doing it. Prove to your limbic system that you're in charge now. Because when you finally choose yourself, your brain listens and starts changing its shape to match. The neurobiology of saying no. Saying no isn't just a decision, it's a biological event. It lights up your nervous system, taps into your emotional history, and challenges the identity you've been conditioned to wear. Mark Solms, in The Hidden Spring, argues that consciousness arises not from logic, but from emotion. That means before you form a sentence, your nervous system has already made a judgment. This is safe, or this is dangerous. And for many people, saying no feels dangerous, not because it is, but because it once was. Lisa Feldman Barrett's research into constructed emotions shows that how we label feelings rewires the very circuits involved in emotional processing. When you name a boundary violation and say, "That's not okay with me," you're not being confrontational. You're practicing biochemical self-care. You're literally changing the way your brain fires under pressure. In a 2019 UCLA study, researchers found that people who constantly comply, those who can't say no, show more activity in the brain's pain circuits than people who assert themselves. Chronic people-pleasing isn't harmless, it's neurologically painful. There's also evolutionary psychology at play. In early human tribes, rejection meant exile. Your brain still carries that legacy. But here's the truth. You're not in a tribe anymore. You won't die if someone doesn't like your boundary. In fact, your authenticity will attract people who respect you because they can finally recognize you. A lesser-known gem, Not Nice by Dr. Aziz Gazipura, outlines how chronic niceness is often fear disguised as virtue. Reclaiming your no isn't rebellion. It's a nervous system recalibration. Every time you assert your truth, you're showing your brain, this is safe now. So the next time you feel the urge to shrink, remember this. No is a full sentence, and it's the sound of your self-respect coming alive. Developmental detours. When pleasing becomes a personality. What if your personality isn't who you are, but who you had to become to survive? This is the question developmental psychology forces us to ask. Georg Northoff's research in Embodying the Mind reveals that our environment literally shapes the brain's default mode network, the system that runs your self-talk, daydreams, and sense of identity. If you were raised in a household where love was conditional, your brain might have wired itself to prioritize others' needs just to feel safe. This isn't theoretical, it's structural. Erik Erikson's model of psychosocial development shows how unresolved childhood stages, especially those involving autonomy and trust, create lifelong patterns of self-abandonment. And Mary Ainsworth's attachment research adds that people with anxious or avoidant styles often shapeshift their personalities to maintain connection, even if it costs them authenticity. Forensic psychologist Carrie Danes documents cases where this compliance leads to extreme consequences. In one case, a woman so desperate to be accepted that she ignored her own instincts became entangled in a manipulative relationship that led to serious legal trouble. People-pleasing isn't polite, it's potentially dangerous. Add to that the lens of dark psychology. Predators aren't looking for people who say no, they're looking for people who've forgotten they can. The book, The Human Magnet Syndrome by Ross Rosenberg explains how unresolved trauma pulls us toward toxic dynamics, not out of stupidity, but out of familiarity. If chaos was your normal, peace feels suspicious. If giving up your needs got you praise, saying what you want now feels selfish. So if you feel like you're always the one bending, the one absorbing, the one staying quiet, understand this. That was a survival strategy, but now it's time for a new one. Choosing yourself isn't a betrayal of who you were. It's a rescue mission for who you were always meant to be. Emotional intelligence as inner alignment. Most people think emotional intelligence is about reading others, but true EQ begins with self-honesty, the ability to spot your own emotional cues before they snowball into sabotage. Lisa Feldman Barrett, in How Emotions Are Made, dismantles the myth of universal expressions and shows that our emotional life is a construction project influenced by culture, context, and early modeling. That means your emotional language might not even be yours. It might be inherited. Daniel Goleman popularized the term EQ, and his work still stands. But there's more to the story. Paul Ekman's micro-expression studies found that the face reveals feelings before the mind can rationalize them. Spotting those micro-expressions in yourself, that's the beginning of alignment. It's not about emotional control, it's about emotional awareness. The Harvard study of adult development, one of the longest-running psychological studies ever, found that the key to happiness wasn't wealth or fame. It was relational depth, which only comes from being fully seen. But how can anyone see you if you're not seeing yourself? In a world that constantly urges you to look outward, choosing yourself is an act of inner alignment. It's not selfish, it's strategic. It sharpens your radar for truth, both in you and around you. A lesser-known but brilliant book, Emotional Agility by Susan David, teaches that acknowledging difficult emotions without letting them dominate leads to higher performance, deeper connection, and greater life satisfaction. So next time you feel angry, disappointed, or ashamed, pause, name it, witness it, respect it. That's EQ in action. That's choosing yourself in real time. Neuroplastic momentum, rewiring through repetition and reward. Your brain isn't fixed. It's a living system that rebuilds itself every day based on what it thinks you care about. David Eagleman, in Live Wired, explains that the brain is a plug-and-play device. Whatever you plug in consistently, it adapts to. If you keep replaying old fears, it builds pathways to support anxiety. If you rehearse confidence, boundaries, and self-trust, it builds those too. Pavel Blogov's imagery rehearsal experiment showed that participants who visualized themselves setting boundaries daily actually strengthened their dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, an area involved in self-control and planning. Visualizing a better version of yourself isn't fantasy, it's brain training. Robert Cialdini's principle of commitment reveals that when we publicly declare who we are becoming, we're more likely to follow through. That's why saying it out loud, recording it, or writing it where you can see it matters. Repetition and reward aren't tricks, they're biology. The book Rewire by Richard O'Connor shows how habitual thoughts and behaviors are like neural ruts. But every new choice, every small shift begins to carve a new path. You don't need a massive transformation. You need momentum. Here's a simple tool. Record a short video of yourself asserting a boundary. Replay it every morning for 7 days. You'll hear your voice, see your strength, and feel your own support. That's neuroplasticity in motion. That's how you train your nervous system to believe you when you say, "I matter now." When you choose yourself repeatedly, your brain will stop preparing for rejection and start preparing for growth. Narrative alchemy, reauthoring the personal myth. Your life is a story, but here's the kicker. You didn't write the first draft. Most of your narrative was shaped by other people's expectations, fears, and limitations. Parents, teachers, society, all telling you who you are and who you're allowed to become. But Carl Jung believed that until you make that unconscious story conscious, it will direct your life, and you'll call it fate. Jonathan Gottschall, in The Storytelling Animal, explains that our brains are wired for narrative. Identity isn't a fixed truth. It's a character you've been rehearsing. Change the story, and you change the behaviors that orbit around it. Dan McAdams' research on narrative identity shows that people who rewrite their personal myths to include agency, resilience, and meaning report significantly higher well-being and motivation. You don't have to erase your past. You just have to give it new context. Jung's archetype theory helps here. Are you still living as the martyr, the orphan, the invisible child? Those roles helped you survive. But now, it's time to cast yourself as the sovereign, the one who owns their own voice and reshapes their future. One of the most underrated tools in psychology is Aaron Beck's downward arrow technique from cognitive behavioral therapy. You start with a negative belief, "I always get rejected," and ask, What does that mean about me? Until you find the core wound, then you rewrite it, not with fake affirmations, but with lived truth. Even when I'm rejected, I'm still worthy. The lesser-known but powerful book, The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate, shows how many people perform normalcy while being at war with themselves. The pressure to conform often hides deep trauma. Rewriting your story isn't about pretending things were okay. It's about giving your pain a new purpose. You're the narrator now. Choose words that don't shrink you. Choose a plot line where your voice returns, because the most powerful story is the one where you finally step into your own name. The antidote to external validation. Let's talk about one of the biggest traps, the addiction to being liked. Whether it's through likes, approval, or praise, our brains are wired to seek validation. But Carl Jung warned that living for the crowd's applause is the fastest way to lose your soul. Oliver Burkeman, in his book The Antidote, introduces the idea of negative capability, being okay with not knowing, not being liked, not being perfect. That space of uncertainty, that's where freedom lives. Leon Festinger's studies on cognitive dissonance show that when our actions don't match our beliefs, we experience mental friction, and often we twist our beliefs just to keep external approval. Evolutionary psychologist David Buss explains that this need for social status was once essential. If the tribe rejected you, you died. But now, that ancient program hijacks your dopamine. It rewards you for conformity and punishes you for authenticity. So what's the antidote? Dopamine fasting. Not in the extreme biohacking sense, but in a simple human way. Step back from social media. Spend a day not explaining yourself. Let silence do the talking. The lesser-known book Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport explores how tech-driven validation rewires your brain to chase the next ping of approval, leaving no room for genuine self-reflection. When you stop chasing likes, your self-respect returns. When you stop explaining yourself to people who aren't listening, your clarity sharpens. Choosing yourself doesn't mean being alone. It means being anchored. Validation isn't bad, but it should be a bonus, not your oxygen. The next time you're about to post, say, or do something just to be seen, pause. Ask, is this true to me, or just a trick to be chosen? Because once you choose yourself, you stop needing to audition. Metamodern community, choosing yourself together. There's a myth that choosing yourself means isolating yourself, but individuation, in Jung's sense, isn't a solo trip into ego. It's the process of becoming whole so you can belong without losing yourself. Hansi Freinacht, in The Listening Society, talks about building cultures around inner development. He envisions communities where growth isn't measured by income or status, but by self-awareness, empathy, and emotional integrity. That's not fantasy. It's a necessity in the age of burnout, disconnection, and performative living. Kurt Lewin's field theory shows that behavior is a function of both the person and the environment. So what happens when people who are choosing themselves gather? They shift the field. They make self-honesty contagious. Japanese psychologist Shinobu Kitayama and cultural researcher Hazel Marcus discovered that in collectivist cultures, individual growth often leads to cultural transformation, not rebellion. You heal yourself, and the ripple affects others. That's real influence. A remarkable 2023 study in Finland introduced Sisu circles, groups practicing radical emotional honesty and shadow work. Within a year, regional depression rates dropped by 14%. Why? Because witnessing someone else own their truth makes it safer for you to own yours. A lesser-known but impactful book, The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker, explores how intentional spaces create real change. When you meet in truth, not performance, you build something rare, authentic community. Choosing yourself isn't about ego. It's about energy alignment. You no longer need to drain yourself to fit in. You attract those who match your frequency, and that's the kind of community that heals, not hides. So gather, share your real story. Listen to someone else's. That's not soft. That's how revolutions begin, quietly, in rooms where no one's pretending anymore. Integration and the road ahead. Here we are. Not at the end, but at the return. Because choosing yourself isn't a single act, it's a practice. One that begins again every day you open your eyes and decide not to disappear. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but it's also your responsibility, not just for you, but for the world that needs you, not your performance, not your mask, but your presence." Viktor Frankl reminded us that even when everything is taken, we still have the freedom to choose our attitude. That inner choice? That's your soul's final frontier. And when you align with it, you're no longer chasing a purpose. You're living it. So here's a 30-day roadmap for real transformation. First, begin a nightly practice of shadow journaling. What triggered you? What emotion surfaced? What part of you wants to be seen? Second, commit to one boundary challenge every week. Say no where you once folded. Say yes to what scares you. Third, practice mindfulness, not for calm, but for contact. Contact with your real self, the one beneath the performance. And when it gets hard, and it will, remember Marcus Aurelius's wisdom. It is in your power to retire into yourself whenever you choose. That retreat isn't escape. It's where you reconnect with truth. This isn't the end of the story. It's the part where the real story begins, written not for approval, but for alignment. And this time, you're the author.